the 14 stations of the journey of Christ. It is a strange situation which has created the present occasion. 2 years ago, I was going to see a mountain and a beautiful little village nearby. Paul was driving us there. It was a very beautiful sunny morning, and we had the pleasure of walking a path talking about some holy things. We found ourselves on the way to a beautiful church. On the way, we had the 14 stations of the journey of Christ depicted in 14 little temples. During the course of our conversation, I was just making a few remarks about those stations with my brother Paul. I think afterwards it made a very big impression upon our minds. And when I received the program for today some months ago in India, and I saw the title of the lecture this evening, I understood that it was the reminiscence of our journey to that little village. Today I had the verification. Paul himself came and told me that he felt something interesting about our conversation that day, and he was inclined to select this topic for this evening. One strange idea came to my mind that morning. I have to make a confession of it. It was a reminiscence of one incident during my childhood. When I was a boy of about 13 years, some foreigners came to our village. I was entrusted to them to show the various parts of our town that day. I took them to various important places, including the Roman Catholic Church, and then I took them to a Hindu temple, and they suddenly stopped and said, "We do not enter into it." I was quite a boy. I did not know that religions exist. I was daily visiting the temple and the church and the school by way of veneration just as a boy, and till then I didn't understand that something like Christianity or Hinduism existed. So I could not understand when they refused to enter into the temple. I asked them why. They said, "This is a temple of idolatry," and that they did not believe in idolatry. And also they believed that God existed everywhere. I made a silly question. If God existed everywhere, He can exist in this temple also. And they had, I think, no reply. They smiled and they entered the Hindu temple. They went with me round the temple and came out. That was the reminiscence I was having when I was walking with Paul, because when I find beautiful and holy temples anywhere, since I am not concerned with the religions, I am concerned only with the temples, and wherever I find the representations in pictures of holy stories, of, let it be paintings of great artists or sculptures, the thought comes to my mind, why such a pious thing can be called idolatry? When something makes us remember of God, and when something leads us into the spirit of devotion, when something brings to our mind a pious incident that happened in the life of God, why should we be foolish to call it idolatry? This is the idea which comes to my mind many times. And though some religious people call it idolatry, there are great artists and devotees who offered their whole life to the art of making the pictures of incidents of God. And international artists like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, when they have dedicated their lives totally to the Spirit of God by making pictures of the incidents of God's life, is it not a great sin to call them idolaters? Is it not a great sin to call a temple a center of idolatry? This was the idea which came to my mind when I was walking with Paul to the beautiful little temple in that village, on the way of which there were 14 beautiful little temples. Since then, I had an idea to express this sentiment to some of our people. But since there was no occasion, it was existing at the bottom of my heart. Now, I can say that Paul has created an occasion to bring it out and place before you. Along with this, I have a new dimension to place before your minds about the life incidents of great people. The authors of Indian scriptures mention the lives of great people are linked up with natural phenomena and sometimes social and political crises and some upheavals of nature like a big storm or earthquake, etc. And also in the same scriptures they mention that before these great people come down to earth, there will be signs and signals to holy people who can recognize that a great light is coming to earth. It is always the same. If you read the story of Lord Krishna coming to earth, you know how the incidents tally. It was a story that happened about 5,000 years ago. His parents were imprisoned years before he was born, and every child that were born to them was killed immediately, and that was the circumstance under which Krishna was born as the 8th child of their parents. The 7 previous children were killed instantaneously after they were born, and under peculiar circumstances the child was carried away to some village and he was brought up in a village of cowherds. The birth of Lord Buddha is full of such incidents. Continuously for 5 nights before the consummation of Buddha, his mother was having great divine signs and signals of his coming down. And finally, a big white elephant came down from space through the window in the form of the double triangle, and it came with great brilliance and entered into her growth center. Such signs were there before the beginning of every great light. And the life incidents of those great souls are always extraordinary. Often even the passage that is leaving the physical sheath was also extraordinary. Even the physical death. Often it is of a dramatic nature. Something unexpected was always there. This is what we understand when we carefully study the life of Jesus the Christ. Another idea comes to my mind whenever I study these lines from the ancient scriptures. Nature has a peculiar tendency of producing periodicities. One of the features is the coming down of the Lord through cycles of time. It is called the phenomenon of avatar in India, which means a descent. It is called the return of the Lord and return of the Buddha by the Buddhists, and you know it as the reappearance of the Christ from the books of Alice A. Bailey. So, nature has some peculiar tendency to produce signs and signals, even in the mundane life. If you study carefully the detail of embryology, the embryonic development of the human embryo through 9 months, it is not a blind incident that occurs. It is the enactment of a drama which is always the same story. The drama contains the story of life from its beginning on this earth through all the stages of evolution and finally the coming of the human frame. The modern biologists also have accepted this fact. They accept that protogeny proves phylogeny. That is, that is, the embryo of any living being on this earth enacts the drama of the biological kingdom up to that stage of development. Similarly, the story of human embryo enacts the story of many thousands of years of evolution up to the present stage of human evolution. This gives a clue to understand how the prophecy is there for the coming down of the Lord, and every time how the same prophecy is fulfilled in the form of the incidents of the world teacher who walks on earth. In fact, it is the same light that comes to earth to establish the law once again. That is what is said in the Bhagavad Gita. Whenever there is social and ethical disorder among human beings, and whenever there is a disturbance in the human values, whenever everything goes into total disorder, I will come down to earth again and again and set things right according to the then required necessity. This is how the promise of the world teacher goes according to Bhagavad Gita. So when we read the Gospels and the Old Testament, many times we read some sentences. For example, thus it was written, so it is fulfilled. Such sentences occur in many hundreds of places in the Old Testament and the Gospels. And the sentence that prophecy is fulfilled belongs to such a category. And let us correlate all these sentiments together before we can make a closer study of the life of such great souls, not through the glasses of any one religion, but through our own natural eyes. This is, from this point, I considered always the Holy Bible and the Indian scriptures. And often, many times, it is rather late when humanity understands things. There were not many people who understood Jesus when he was on earth. Many times it was the case. There were at best 12 people who tried to follow him. One of them by circumstances proved a traitor, and another had to refuse his master thrice before the cock crowed. So we have only 10 people very strongly stood for their master. Strange that such a great master as Peter was tempted to deny the masterhood of Christ and his relation with him thrice in the night. So true faith is always a rare commodity. Humanity is eternally traveling towards it. From the time of Moses and from even earlier times, that is from the time of Lord Krishna, that is 5,000 years ago, and till today, we find ourselves in the same state. The advent of the coming down of the Lord is there periodically, but the humanity is the same. When Lord Krishna initiated the humanity with Bhagavad Gita, humanity remained the same till today. When Gautama the Buddha came down as the light of the world, gave the light of compassion Even after that, we are a success and Buddha is a failure. And even after Jesus, who has offered himself up on the Christ for all of us, we are a success and he is a failure because we remained the same. And the defects of humanity remained the same. And the human society went more and more downtrodden since the time of Christ till today. So he has his own methods of coming down again and again. Now also some of us feel that it is time for him to come down. And there are some false Christs coming down, promising that the Christ would speak in the television, etc. Promising some nonsense in the name of Christ, instead of meditating upon him and offering ourselves up to the great light. So the humanity remained always the same, but there is one secret. It is the individuals who follow the path of the Lord and not the society at large. Because the word society is only imaginary and there nothing exists except individuals. When the matter of purification comes, it depends upon our readiness to accept, our readiness to follow, and our readiness to submit ourselves to the Lord. And however much religion we may preach in this world, the willingness remains purely individual, and the path is to be followed by everyone for himself. No one can help another to follow the path. So narrow is the path, say the scriptures. The path is razor's edge arranged vertically, upon the blade of which we are expected to walk. This is what the Upanishads speak of the path. And a person sitting on an elephant may pass through the eye of a needle, but still the path of salvation is individual. We cannot take anyone with us. Everyone has to cross the doorway for himself or herself. So it is for this reason that the Lord comes down again and again. Not for the society at large he comes, because it is not a mass scale political attempt, but it is a path of salvation which is purely personal. So often men understand things a little bit late. It is not until a few decades after crucifixion people came to understand that a great light came to the world. Now we may build many thousands of churches on the globe, give conferences fearlessly upon the Lord, because we are sure that we will not be crucified, that it is the Lord who got crucified for us, and we are safe here. But when the light was there on this earth, it was only very few people who felt it and who followed it. So afterwards there will be many stories added to the life. By way of showing our gratitude, the incidents from the birth of Jesus right up to the crucifixion and further, they are taken and recorded after the incident of crucifixion, and they were gathered into the Gospels. But as we can very easily feel by reading these Gospels, that it is only a passing reference that they remembered and recorded on paper, that at least about 80% of what has happened escaped from being recorded, because we can very easily feel the gaps between incident and incident, and it is only at random that things were recorded. And how it would have been if there was a fellow who was recording the diary of the life. So we missed a lot of wealth, and we the human beings are always trained to miss good things. And after the incident has happened, we begin to imagine and fill up the gaps with our imaginations. These are some of the ideas which come to my mind whenever I go through the Gospels. The Gospels are not at all a continuous records. What would have happened between incident and incident? How he spoke, how he heard the people, how he lived with them, how he felt the difficulties of people, how he allowed the whole humanity to walk on his heart. All these things would have been better known by us. If at all there was one fellow who could record the whole diary of Jesus. Of course, I wanted to make a loud thinking of these thoughts, put forth before you, before we try to meditate upon the 14th incidents. I think it was about the time of the 13th century. One by name Francis, he must be an Italian, started to follow a new path, that is to make an imitation of the incidents of the life of Christ. In Indian tradition also, we have a strange tradition called the Holy Pilgrimage, where people spend a few weeks taking journeys and enacting the life incidents of great lights of the past, because it is always better to try to follow the footsteps of these lights instead of trying to propagate about them. So an attempt to imitate Christ is always elevating, and to that effect they made a story of what has happened before crucifixion. So they enumerated the incidents that led to crucifixion and made a journey of some stations. At first it seems there were 7 stations after the pattern of the 7 great churches, church, and 7 great sealed scriptures of the universe, called in the gospel 7 great seals, and the 7 planetary principles that are working in nature, that are called the 7 candles before the altar. According to these phenomena, 7 stations were recorded at first, and devotees used to make an imitation of the story with these 7 stations. Afterwards, the number of stations increased, and there was the system of 12 great stations of Christ, and there was an interpretation according to the 12 zodiacal signs, and then there is the narration of the story in 14 stations, and finally 15 stations. But the story of 14 stations has been standardized by many devotees. Even then, those who followed the 12 stations considered the remaining stations as subsequent additions. But such a critical outlook is not at all welcome in matters of devotion and self-offering to the Lord. So let us try to make a mention for our meditation of the 14 stations. Our brother Paul will project the pictures on the screen. The first station, that is, he was judged and given the judgment, sentenced to death. The second station, a bit difficult, because the Lord has taken cross on his shoulders.